Welcome back. So today I want to cover a big misconception, and that is around narcissists wanting to ultimately destroy you, and that is their primary goal. So the reason I want to cover this is because I think it's a very important distinction, because narcissists aren't actually seeking to destroy people that they're close to. They're actually seeking power and domination more than anything, being the central focus, being the center of attention, being the cause of basically everything so that they can feel omnipotent and relevant and important. And sometimes the act of creating chaos and drama and destroying other people is actually just a byproduct of the seeking of control. And I also want to cover cult leaders in this video today, because cult leaders often fall into the category of narcissists. In fact, more than likely do. I'd say 99.9% of cult leaders even are narcissistic or narcissists, fully blown narcissists. So I think it's important to cover both, because we can look at it on the macro level, as in the cult level, and we can look at it on the micro level, as in the one-to-one relationship or the cult of one. So essentially, that misconception is it's well, it's a misconception. It's not accurate, and I guess narcissists aren't actually committed to any one particular persona. They're not committed to being the villain. They're not committed to being the hero. They're not committed to, being the social justice warrior. It's whatever will achieve their primary goal of seeking control. So that's the main thing. So when you take a example of an intimate partner relationship with a narcissist, for example, in the beginning, they're raising heaven, so to speak. And that is through intense love bombing, through putting you on a pedestal, through giving you gifts, through telling you you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. The issue is for narcissists that the honeymoon period or the love bombing period does not last forever in a normal relationship. Say you've got a narcissist and an empath. That honeymoon love bombing phase can only last for so long before the before the empath will inevitably need to sort of come down from that high and start building a more trusting connection. And that's normal and that's healthy, and of course there might be some disappointment associated with that, because we all enjoy that intense honeymoon period, that intense love bombing period. I mean, who wouldn't want to be told that they're amazing and wonderful and all that sort of stuff? But inevitably, even in a normal relationship, that's got to come down, right? And it's all about then building trust with the other person, slowing down. But the problem with a narcissist is that they can't tolerate that. They absolutely cannot tolerate that sudden coming down from the honeymoon period, from the love bombing period, because the love bombing period essentially caters towards everything they're looking for, caters towards all their needs. It gives them the highs and the lows. Mostly the highs. It gives them a sense of adoration. It gives them novelty. It means that, they're able to maintain control. And the moment that starts to wane out, there's a slight bit of panic coming from the narcissist. So at that stage, in order to then maintain a sense of control, they may do something like, pick a fight, or, withdraw from the relationship, or flip into a different persona, or do any number of things to create a drama and instability, so ultimately they can gain that power and control back, and they can also get their narcissistic supply or fuel back from you. Because when you're coming out of that love bombing phase and you're starting to want to kind of slow down and start to build trust, you're not giving out as much emotional output anymore. And for the narcissist, that means that their supply starts to dry up, it starts to dwindle, and they can't have that. They absolutely cannot have that. So that's a really good example of how it plays out in an intimate relationship. And when it comes to the narcissistic cult leader, and how they kind of seek control, how they raise heaven and hell, so to speak. So they may start out, again, like the one-on-one relationship, creating a scenario of heaven by love bombing the various cult the various cult members, telling them that they're amazing, they're brilliant, they're beautiful, they couldn't live without them. But then when that sort of starts to, again, phase out or calm down, they start to panic. And a really good example of this would be the good old NXIVM cult. If you can remember that cult, led by Keith Raniere back in the, I think, early 2000s. So, he created the self-help group NXIVM, and behind the scenes, he was actually having multiple relationships with multiple women. And even that wasn't enough. Even though he was keeping those secret, and he had more than enough supply because he had more and more women that he was seducing and taking on board as his intimate partner. He then created, in conjunction with Alison Mack, a secret society of women called DOS. Well, you could argue that Alison Mack was actually the leader of that, but in actual fact, Keith Raniere was the mastermind, the puppeteer behind the curtain, recruiting Alison in a very covert way to make it look like it was her invention to create this secret master-slave society so that he could, essentially raise hell. So, and therefore get more narcissistic supply, get more drama, get more chaos, and feed off that, and ultimately feel very, very powerful. So that's just another example of how it plays out in a cult setting. And so, as you can see, it's very dangerous, because whilst destroying you isn't the primary goal, it's still about maintaining control. And you cannot have an equal, meaningful, healthy relationship with somebody who is driven that way. They're ultimately going to seek more and more and more and more and create more and more drama and more chaos. They're never satisfied. They keep going and going and going. And that's ultimately what just keeps playing out till the end of time. And I guess eventually they'll do themselves in, and, much like in the case with Keith Raniere, I mean, he ended up in jail. So that's how his perpetual seeking of power and control and creating chaos ended for him. So I guess all of this is to say that the saying, if I can't raise heaven, I'll raise hell, is incredibly apt to describe the narcissist and how they operate. If they can't maintain heaven through the love bombing phase, which will, with a normal empathetic person, will eventually die out, they will then create drama, chaos, do all sorts of manipulative things to uh, you know, create a unstable situation so they can get more narcissistic supply. They don't care really if people hate them. In fact, that's okay for them. If somebody declares their hatred for them, that's might be a challenge to them, but it's also ultimately giving them what they want, which is a sense of omnipotence, a sense of power, a sense of, well, you may hate me, but it's because of me. It's because of me that you hate me. I've done something. I'm having power and control over you. So therefore, I'm getting what I want, essentially. And sometimes for a narcissist, that's even better, that because the power of hatred, the energy involved in somebody hating them and kind of putting that energy their way. I mean, that's A grade narcissistic fuel, really, when you think about it. They don't care essentially whether you love them or hate them, but as long as you love or hate them, and they'll raise heaven or hell to get that. Because if you don't care, if you're indifferent, if you really see them as irrelevant, then that's proving to them that they're not anything, really, that they're not worthy of even disliking. And for a narcissist, that's difficult. That's hard. That's the ultimate betrayal, because that means that their needs aren't met, and ultimately, if that continues, they get starved of what they want. Adoration, fuel, and that is what actually keeps the false persona online and going. And without that, what have they got? An empty shallowness. So that's what it's all about. Anyway, just a short video today. I hope that was helpful, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back again very soon with another video.